All right. Do we see people? I might be like a minute late, but hopefully everyone is here. Can someone confirm that you can both hear and see me? Hello? Yes. Perfect. Okay. Hello and good morning, everyone. I'm Morgan Donner, and today I wanted to talk to you about sewing mock-ups and your questions about mock-ups because I had just posted a video a week or so back and it seemed like I got a lot of the same recurring questions, so I figured I'd pop in here today and talk to you about that for a bit. I've got so many people saying hello. Hello, everyone. It's very exciting. Oh my gosh. So, okay, let's go ahead and just jump on in, and I will try to keep an eye on relevant comments as I see them. Oh, there's so many people saying hello. Hello, everyone. Oh my gosh. Okay, so first thing I wanted to talk about, which was easily the number one question. Number one was, what do I do with mock-ups whenever I'm done? What do I do whenever I've used them to do their mock-up purpose and see if my pattern is working or not working? And okay, what do you do then? Well, there's a couple different things that I typically do. I will either turn that mock-up into a lining for the actual garment, and usually I have to keep that in mind before I'm starting my project. I can't just kind of decide at the end like, oh yes, this rubber ducky fabric, that is going to be the perfect lining for my 16th century coat. If I know that I want to use the mock-up as a sort of kind of test that I think is close enough, I think it's almost perfect, and I can go ahead and just use it on the final garment, I need to know that before I start. So that is one thing to keep in mind, is if you are wanting to use your mock-up on something and you want to get the extra double use out of it by turning it into the lining for the future garment, know that before you start. Obviously on my most recent project, the one that I showed in that previous video, I used old cotton sheets, like bed sheets, for my mock-up. And so I knew I wasn't going to be using it as the lining for my final garment. The garment that I'm making, the medieval garments reconstructed garment, doesn't seem, as far as I can tell from their research, indicate that most of them were lined. So I already knew I wasn't going to use it as a lining, but I am going to use it as a backup garment, a lazy thing that I can wear on Sunday morning when I'm trying to get woken up and packed up at an event. You know, something easy that I can just toss on, and I don't care if I get coffee or bacon grease or whatever on it. It's fine. Okay, so yes. What else do I do with mock-ups? If I make them out of a fabric that is nice enough for the purpose, that sounds weird to say, but sometimes what I'll do is I will cut it up and use it as wrapping. For any of you who've bought something from me on Etsy, then you know that I often wrap my purchases, my items. I wrap them up in fabric or paper or all sorts of things, and with ribbon, and stamp it with wax, and because I think it's really cute and fun. But that is a great purpose for, I only need pretty small pieces of fabric for that. And so that's where some of my mock-ups go. They get cut up into little squares and used as wrapping. What else do I do with mock-ups? A lot of the time, if it's something that I'm pretty sure I'm probably going to use that pattern again, sometimes what I'll do is I'll take the mock-up, and just keep it with the pattern, with the paper pattern. That way, if I come back to it in a year or 2 years and I go, I don't actually quite remember how this mock-up or how this pattern fit me, using that paper or using the mock-up that you've kept with the paper pattern gives you a really quick and easy way to just try it back on and see whether or not it'll still fit you. Okay. Looking at some of these comments here. Yes, and using your mock-up as your pattern is also a great way to go, because you can unpick all of the seams and then iron it and lay it flat, and now you have a pattern that's just made out of fabric, and that's fine too. It doesn't really matter whether your pattern is paper or fabric, as long as it's not too stretchy, right? Let's see. So another question. Oh, how do I store my mock-ups and things? Yes, Cosmic Drama, fabric does stretch. As I said, you want to make sure that you're using fabric that's a pretty non-stretchy one. If you're doing like a knit fabric or something that's just kind of loosey-goosey, that is not going to be a good pattern. I don't recommend that. But if it's good and non-stretchy. Where do I store my patterns and mock-ups and things? Not very well. If I can, what I like to do is go ahead and fold them all up so that they're the size of like a big Ziploc, like the big gallon size Ziplocs. And I fold them so that they all fit in there. I'll write on the front of these Ziplocs something that says like Harry Olsness number 38 pattern. And I'll usually include the date. So what is the date? September? October. October 2019, something to that effect. And that is a great way to know when you made a pattern. I connect a lot of things with dates, so it's easier for me to think like, oh yeah, about this time last year. Okay, yeah, I remember which one that is. And it helps me out. Another thing that I will do for various patterns is when I'm labeling them, instead of labeling them something like mock-up version 3.0 or dress 3.0 or something like that, what I'll often do is, if that mock-up became a project, if it was successful enough and fit well enough and I've adjusted it correctly and it becomes an actual garment, what I'll go ahead and do is label it with the name of that garment. So for example, I made a 16th century Sailor Moon style dress, so I labeled the bodice piece with Sailor Moon dress. And that way I instantly know, oh yeah, I know exactly how that pattern fits and have an immediate reference. So definitely recommend that as something to mark your pattern pieces with, and your mock-ups that you keep with said pattern pieces as well. It never hurts. I see a recommendation there to put measurements on with your pattern pieces. Definitely a good idea. I've been fairly lucky-ish. Mostly stayed the same size in the past 10 years-ish. So I don't usually worry too much about that. But because I often have that project that I made, like the Sailor Moon dress, I know how recently I've worn that and can remember, how well it fits, or decide if it needs to maybe be adjusted a little bit. Okay, so a little bit away from patterns, let's go back to mock-ups just a bit. So I got a lot of questions about fabric for mock-ups in all sorts of ways. What fabric is most appropriate? Can I use this fabric for this thing? Dawn wants a shout out. Hi, Dawn. So if you're doing something like corset, stays, anything that's going to have a lot of negative ease, so that means you're making the garment smaller than your actual measurements, right? Because you want it to be that level of tight. So anything that's going to be really structured and fitted like that, I would probably recommend that you use something a little bit sturdier than cotton sheets, like I did in my last video. I think that you'd want something that really has like no stretch, none, absolutely none, because you want to make sure that the final garment that you're making this item out of also has no stretch. So you want to have like fabric to like fabric with your final garment and your mock-up. You want them to behave similarly so that you know how well they're going to do the thing. Would quilting cotton work? If your quilting cotton is maybe on the thicker side, I usually think of quilting cotton as pretty thin, and there are ways you can also get around that. If you have a fabric that's non-stretch, but it's really, really thin and you're not sure that it's quite going to behave how you want it to, another thing you can do is just back it on top of itself. Flatline, use multiple layers of the same fabric, and that sometimes helps make it a little bit more sturdy, a little bit more usable for the project that you're aiming for. Now, I really love going fabric shopping at thrift stores and things like that. For example, I have down here, oh, heavy. I have this cotton duck sort of fabric, which I see a few of you have also mentioned, and I really love using fabric like this because it's super, super sturdy. I got it at the fabric, excuse me, it was at the thrift store, and I think the reason why is because it had been water damaged. It's pretty clear that the bottom half here must have been like sitting in water at some point. So it's got like those creeping water stains. But you know, if I only use the top half of the fabric, it's fine. And this is a way for this piece of fabric to have a second life use purpose without just going in the trash. So I am all about buying fabric, especially secondhand or clearance or what have you, for the express purpose of making a mock-up out of it, because I feel like any use is a good use compared to it doesn't get bought and just thrown away. Okay, fabric. Yes, upholstery is also a good fabric for making really sturdy, non-stretch things. Now, the reverse is true as well. If you're making something super light and fluttery, like a light cotton blouse or something, you definitely wouldn't want to use a strong cotton duck or canvas for anything like that. So you definitely want to kind of cleverly pick your battles as to what fabrics will work best with your project. So definitely a good thing to keep in mind. Let's see. You guys are just so chatty. How fun. Oh, goodness. I see that everyone is very helpfully recommending different fabrics for each other and where they can get them at a good price and what have you. I do see here that someone's asking about linen. Unfortunately, it went away. This is my first time live chatting, so it's interesting how quickly the comments go by and then they disappear. I don't see them anymore. So, but someone said something about linen stretching, and it for sure does. And that is something I keep in mind if I'm ever making a mock-up out of something linen. Yes. And usually I'll make a linen mock-up if my final garment is also going to be linen. I don't often, I like linen enough for things, and it has a lot of good, really good historical uses, that I usually won't use it for mock-ups too much unless I'm turning it into the lining or what have you. But for linen, and really for any mock-up, something I really recommend if you're doing something that's sturdy and you have that negative ease and you want to make sure that it's going to fit you later, because it's something that's going to be under a bit of strain and might stretch, you absolutely want to just kind of wear your mock-up around the house for, at least a few hours, maybe longer. Hello, Bernadette. And wearing your mock-up around gives it a chance to stretch. It gives it a chance to do whatever the fabric's going to do, if that is helpful information for you. But it's also really good because it gives you and your body a chance to get used to that pattern, to that mock-up. I have made a lot of bodice mock-ups. I've made so many bodices. And I always make them out of like really tough canvas or duck. I'll make it multiple layers. I will usually go ahead and bone. I'll usually also bone the mock-up as well, and that way I can wear it around and get a really strong sense of exactly how that mock-up is going to fit over the long term. Because whenever I put it on at first, everything kind of looks great. I look in the mirror, I think it's all good, but once you've worn it for a bit, you might realize that something is rubbing really uncomfortably, or just you realize after a bit that, like, oh, maybe that neckline's a little bit lower or higher than I actually want, and that extended wear period for your mock-up is really helpful for getting that information, or at least I have found it to be really, really informative. Yeah. Okay, let's see. I will go to, let's see. Everyone's so chatty. It's so good. I'll have to go back later after the live stream and really get a good read through for everyone's comments. But another thing that I saw was, how do you know when you've done enough mock-ups? How do you know when you've reached your final mock-up, or if you should do another one or not? Well, that's part of what, not just putting it on and kind of looking at it and then having to make your decision right then. That's where it really comes in handy to go ahead and wear it for a few hours. Also take pictures of it, as I showed in my previous video where I kind of backed away and used my camera in video mode, or some cameras, if you put your hand up to it, it'll take a picture. So if your camera has that mode, that's also really handy for getting pictures of your thing, and at an angle and a viewpoint that's a little bit different than what you would see in the mirror. The mirror doesn't always quite show things in a way that is super helpful or handy. So I definitely recommend doing that extended wear, doing the pictures and really looking at them later, maybe a day or two later when you've had some distance from that pattern, and seeing what changes you want to make, and if it warrants another mock-up. Or if, you know, no, I think I just need to shorten the sleeves and I think it's fine. It's good enough. So that little bit of distance and time where will help you determine whether or not you need to do more mock-ups or you're good enough as it is. All right, let's see. Looking at my questions. How do you find motivation for mock-ups? Because you just want to start on the final project. I do get it, I do. But part of the reason I make mock-ups is because I'm so nervous about starting my actual project. I'm so worried about how, like my project I'm working on now, right? I got this fabric, this wool twill fabric from a Tudor tailor, and it's very pretty and lovely, and might be some of the most expensive fabric I've ever bought for myself. And it's not even all that expensive, but I try really hard to buy things secondhand or on sale or what have you. So I knew that I wanted this fabric, and I knew I was going to be really nervous about cutting into it. So that's why I often do a mock-up, is because I know it's going to settle my nerves. I know it'll give me the confidence to work on that project without fear, because I've made it. I know how it goes together. I know all the different pieces fit and work, and I'm not gonna sew a seam and end up with like wildly different seam lengths or anything. You know, I've sorted out all the kinks, and that gives me the strength to go on with my actual project. So that is how I go about starting a mock-up. Like, I don't do it because I guess I have to, I suppose I should. I do it because I know it'll make the final project so much better, and I also know that I don't have to fuss with it. It doesn't have to be perfect. I can just go and do it and get that confidence and that knowledge, and that's great. I really enjoy that. Something that I wanted to mention, because people are definitely a little bit concerned about the wastefulness of mock-ups and how to make them less wasteful. Very understandable. So I have a couple of things. As I've said, I tend to buy fabric for mock-ups that is the last yard of something that I think will be good for a mock-up, and it's super cheap, and it's clearly been there a while. That's why part of the reason I love thrift stores. I don't mind buying fabric that's discounted because it's damaged in some way, water damage, like I mentioned before, or tears or what have you. It doesn't matter for a mock-up if it's got a little hole or a stain. It's fine. The other thing that you can do for mock-ups to help reduce the waste of it is if you have like a full-length dress that goes to the floor, you don't usually need to make a mock-up for that whole thing. The vast majority of the time, if I'm making a mock-up, the fit that I'm really interested in, that I really want to know what it's going to look like, is from like the hips up. So all that skirt fabric, that doesn't need to be made into part of the mock-up, and you can save, a good couple of yards that way. And that is my recommendation for how to help reduce the amount of fabric that you're using for your mock-up and feel like it's less wasteful. Do I ever dye my mock-ups? I usually don't. I've done a little bit of experimenting with dyeing with like completely store-bought RIT dyes, nothing very exciting. And the results are okay. But I have found it often to be so much more effective to just buy fabric in the color or in the shade that pleases me from the get-go. Trying to buy it and sort of mash a color I want onto it, in my experience, doesn't really work very well. I know other people probably have different experiences with that. If you just want a very slight change, you might be able to get away with dyeing, but I will usually decide before having started the mock-up whether or not I would like to aim for this mock-up to be a usable mock-up, a wearable mock-up, something that can become clothing if it fits okay. And I'm just going to use it to, refine the pattern a little bit. But I usually won't dye it. I haven't had much success with that, so meh. Let's see. I have my list of questions over here. Don't mind me, I'm just reading the comments for a second here. Do I make my own jewelry? Sometimes, but it's not related. I'm seeing a few repeat questions that I've already answered, so forgive me. Do go back and listen to the whole thing in full, and you'll find the answers to those. Let's see. Lots of great recommendations from everyone on uses for mock-ups that are maybe not things I've mentioned, or further details on what I've mentioned. Let's see. So I keep getting this question, what do you do with mock-ups that don't really work? Again, I cut them up and use them as wrapping paper for things, for gifts. I will use them to make smaller projects if that's possible. I will use them to store with the pattern as a record of it, because even if it didn't fit for me, sometimes I will keep my various patterns because they're a little too big or too small, and I'll keep it in case I have a friend that wants that thing and happens to be of that smaller, bigger size. I'll keep that mock-up that didn't work with the paper pattern, and I usually will keep version 1, version 2, version 3, and because each one of those has information that I want to keep. Bum, 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 bum. Oh, how do you know if a pattern needs a mock-up? Is it what? So I have to go back and reread this. How do you know a pattern needs a mock-up? Is it something that is just generally assumed the sexist is going to do? Maybe you mean sewist? Apparently I really need a moment to parse this question. Okay, let's just go with the top of it. And how do you know a pattern needs a mock-up? Well, like I said, I use it for my own confidence building, and sometimes I can look at a pattern, particularly rectangular construction patterns that have no curves, and I can look at it and measure the bust, measure the arm, measure the length, and go, yep, that'll fit me. And because it's rectangular construction, I'm really not too worried if it's a little bit loose, because that's what it's going to be. That is the whole nature of that thing. I tend to use mock-ups on projects that I think are a little bit tricky, that there's some element of them that I haven't done before, and therefore I'm a little bit worried and want to go ahead and straighten out those details. I will use a mock-up on patterns that I use it a lot on anything that's very fitted. The looser it is, the less likely I am to bother with a mock-up. But I see there's a lot of people cursing autocorrect in the feed. So using mock-ups as a way to test those really fitted items that are a bit more nitpicky in how the different pattern pieces fit and come together. So I use it on patterns that I feel need it, and sometimes that's just kind of a, what does my heart say? Let's see here. I have a question from before wanting to know, when do you decide to just give up on a pattern or a mock-up and start completely over? Usually I will determine that with the first mock-up. You know, usually it's not several mock-ups in that I then decide, oh, this isn't working, let's just start over. Usually the very first mock-up, I'll try it on, and if just everything is not working right, I usually won't just keep zhuzhing the mock-up. I will go all the way back to the patterning stage and really assess what is just completely and utterly not working about that. So I don't think I've really had that very often, though. What is the highest number of mock-ups for one garment you've made? Ooh, so the medieval super fitted 4-panel dresses, sometimes referred to as a Gothic fitted dress, those are definitely for me one of the ones that take the most pattern pieces, the most iterations of mock-up. And the reason for that is because you're really trying to get them to also be supportive. And that can be really tricky on just one go. I will often need to go ahead and do it a couple times. It's not only are you trying to get it to be supportive, but you're also trying to get it to be super well fitted and all the seams in just the right places, and it's very kind of nitpicky. So I tend to make the most of those in particular, whether it's for me or I'm making one for someone else, and it just requires a lot of iterations until everyone is really happy with how it supports and fits. Yeah, definitely those. And the number, maybe 4 is the most. On average, though, I usually just do 1 mock-up, usually, sometimes 2. Depends. Let's see. Lots of hellos. Has a pattern ever surprised you by something that you couldn't determine in the mock-up? Like, I also mock up the parts of the pattern I just don't understand, like weird pleats and stuff. That is definitely fair. So that is, to me, kind of more in the category of technique, maybe. If your pattern has something, or your extant garment that you're copying has some element that is just completely not something you've ever done before, you can absolutely try that out on your mock-up, which I will sometimes do. If it's something that I think is a little bit more fabric specific, then sometimes what I'll do is take pieces of my final fabric and sew it together, or try that technique out on like some scraps of it. If I'm ever doing buttonholes, I always will take a mock version of my piece. I'll take the fashion fabric, the interlining, the lining, I'll sew them together at the edge, and I will do a few practice buttonholes, because that way I I'm getting my fingers and mind used to this specific combination of fabrics and threads and things. So it's a bit like a mock-up. I don't actually expect to change anything for my final project, although it may. Mostly I use it as a getting used to the process thing, which is part of what I use mock-ups for. It's teaching me like, okay, no, I really need to do this seam and then this seam. And that way you're not stumbling along and not sure what to do on the actual final version. Let's see. Tips for how a pattern should feel when you're wearing it, how your mock-up should feel, especially when it's tight. Well, I mean, everyone's comfort level with tight garments I have found has been quite different. I can wear things very tight in some ways, and I don't love it so much when they're tight in other ways. And that is often, I feel, very person specific. So I have found some people who, after only a few hours of wearing a certain style of gown, are just, they're not into it. They're like, nope, I don't want anything this tight ever again. And it needs to be that level of tight in order to support or what have you. There's a reason that some people like to do historical costuming from certain periods versus other periods, and comfort with the garment is part of it. But how to tell, how to feel for your own self whether or not a pattern is feeling right and your mock-up's doing good, wear it around the house for a day. Pick a weekend and just button or lace or pin whatever yourself in and wear it all day. I will do that for my more complete mock-ups, where, again, for bodices, I will often go ahead and finish all my edges really quickly. I'll do like a bag lining, nothing fancy. I'll do a really quick garment that is of the pattern and wear that mock-up around all day, and that is what really determines over a longer period if that is the right pattern for you, or if it's going to need a little bit of adjusting to make it nicer. What else do we have? Get closer, look at my chat here. Lots of very lovely hellos. Let's see. Okay, half scale mock-ups. Nah, I don't usually, just because I don't feel like I learned very much. I really want to see it on the actual human body. How about fitting the back? So that's part of why I often do several mock-ups. Sort of often. It's a very good reason to do a mock-up in the first place, is because you can then put it on and you can do the whole taking a picture from over there and seeing how everything looks, and taking a video so that you can see all of the sides of your garment really nicely and clearly. And I have found that to be so helpful for seeing how the side looks. Like, you know, if I want that side seam to really be nice and straight down my side, because that's what I'm aiming for, it's really hard to tell in the mirror. So, but when I'm really standing straight and, like, you know, lift up and take some pictures of that whole situation, that tells me like, oh, okay, the top needs to go over another inch, or it's starting to curve at the bottom. I need to add fabric there or take away fabric there. And it's the same thing for the back. If I'm looking at the back and I see that something is not lining up right, I try, if I can, to just really, really study those pictures and, as best as I can, translate those onto the pattern pieces, the paper pattern pieces. And hopefully that makes sense. You know, if I see that a certain bit needs to go in nearer the waist or nearer the shoulder, you know, a couple inches from the seam, I use those approximate proportional measurements at the picture and see if it's working well with the paper pattern. Do you have any advice for making a 60s dress for my 18-year-old girl? How do you make a mock-up without a pattern? So if you're making a mock-up without a pattern, I would put that more into the category of you are draping your garment. You are making the pattern, so there's not one to start out with. Draping is a little bit of a different beast. It's not quite the same thing. It's just isn't. It's a little bit different, because instead of having a starting point that you are then just testing to see how it looks and fits, you are, give me a second. 1 second. I have to do a thing. Okay. Hopefully that took care of that. So, let's see. Making the dress without a pattern. Sorry, it took me a minute to get back to where I was. So you'll want to, as best as you can, start out with a block, a pattern block, if you've heard of the term. If not, Google it. A pattern block is going to get you a good starting point for making that new pattern. And from there, you can make that pattern block and put it on your 18-year-old kiddo. And then, while it's on them, you can mark what you want the neckline to actually be. You can pin on extra pieces if you wanted to do like a collar of some sort, things like that. Let's see. Chatting about fabric and things. Everyone's really interested in a guy in chat. I've hopefully successfully removed him, so can move on from that. Okay, I'm not seeing any questions immediately here, so let's go back over to my list I got beforehand. So I see here a question of sleeves are the worst. It's not really a question, but I'll take it. So sleeves are, sometimes kind of the worst. And my way to help fix that is by doing a mock-up, is by making a sleeve and trying to shove it on there and seeing if it looks right and if it works, and if it's not working, trying to figure out what's going on. You can take, if you look up online sleeve pattern, try to find some that look like they're about the right shape, and as best as you can, translate that onto your paper pattern, and then give it a try by making a quick mock-up. So whenever you make a mock-up, you don't necessarily have to completely make a whole new thing every single time. You can just rip out the sleeve that's not quite working, make a new one, and sew that sleeve onto your mock-up and see if that improves. My favorite book on sewing would probably have to be Patterns of Fashion 3. In part, I think, because it was one of the first ones that I had that was like a historical sewing thing. I loved all the notes and specific details on things, like this is how big exactly this thing is, and there's a piece of linen cord inside the bit here, and I loved those little details. So that is my favorite book. Okay. Good place online to find historical fabric. One of my favorites is renaissancefabrics.net, in part because their fabric isn't necessarily any better or worse than anybody else's, but I strongly appreciate that they say in very plain, clear language, here is what this type of fabric that we have available for sale is good for. You could use it for this type of thing, this type of thing, this type of thing. And they are specifically referencing historical garments of various sorts, and that really so much more nicely than I've seen on other fabric sites really helped me determine whether or not that fabric is going to be a good fit for my project. A lot of fabric stores online will say things like, this fabric is good for pants and shirts and dresses and coats and jackets and shoes. And I'm like, I don't believe you. I don't feel like it's good for all of those things. So that's part of my love for Renaissance fabrics, is I trust what they're saying about their product. Let's see. When will we be seeing your Norse dress? Well, it's currently in pieces on the table behind you guys. I still have a couple more pieces to cut out, and that will take a while. I don't know. Curse this whole day job thing. Maybe a couple more weeks, probably. I was really kind of hoping to get it out before Halloween, but I think, knowing my own sewing and editing speed, that doesn't seem likely, unfortunately. But it's getting there, bit by bit. I'll keep going. Do you pre-wash your mock-up fabric? I usually don't, in part because it depends on what the use is going to be, of course. If I know 100% that I definitely want to go ahead and use this mock-up into my the lining of my garment, then okay, I will probably go ahead and pre-wash the fabric the same I would for any fabric that's going to become a garment, with exceptions. But if it's just going to be a mock-up that I know is going to be iffy, and I know I don't want to use it in the lining, I'm probably a lot less likely to bother with pre-washing. Yeah, it is a good book. I'm a very big fan. I see here that Vicky says that she has the Medieval Garments Reconstructed book, and it's really fun. I do wish that this and its companion book, Woven into the Earth, were just one book, one product instead of two. But that's the way things are sometimes, and I'm still waiting for my copy of Woven into the Earth to come, because it has some more details from like the dig itself, and I'm very excited to read up in more detail about the thing I'm making. Okay. Any historical evidence that people made mock-ups? Not particularly. Not saying that they didn't do it. Not saying that they definitely did do it. But have I seen evidence of it? No. Sorry. That really kind of covers all of the questions I had here. Where did I get the book? Probably Amazon. I think that's where most of my books come from these days. Although I can't remember. I might have also gotten it from one of our local medieval fairs. We have events where there'll be vendors at the events selling their wares, and there's at least one of them locally that will often buy books that they have found in thrift stores or what have you that are completely relevant to our group, but they happen to find one at a good deal, so they'll sell it for just a little bit more than they purchased it for, but still often less than full retail price, which is really nice. So I have a lot of books that I've gotten through that. Sorry for the thumb in front of the camera here, trying to see what I can see here. Let's see, I did see a question about whether or not this includes men's patterns, and yes, probably. And I say it that way because we don't actually know the gender for really any of these garments. A lot of them are so plain, they're like all wool, all relatively rectangular construction. The proportions might lead you to lean one direction or another in gender, but who knows how much of that is our own bias. I know that there's enough of a question of what is the gender of the original garment that I'm not sure if it's because during the original find, which was like 1920s, I want to say that they found the garments because the burial site was near the shore, and it was actually like next to a historical church, and so you could see like the floor plan of the church, and that's about all was left. And it was eroding away at this grave site, and that is how the garments were found, is people locally would find bits of fabric and things. So we didn't find them in a pristine, fully intact grave type situation. So we don't know whose bones were inside each garment, and therefore it's really, really hard to say what the gender of the different garments in there is. So let's see. I see here, I often have to make the same adjustments to patterns, shortening the bodice, reducing cup size, and so on. Would you recommend making a preemptive adjustment before the first mock-up? And yeah, absolutely. If you have a pattern that you've purchased maybe, and the pattern suggests that you cut out size 10, so you cut out size 10, and then you actually sit there and measure the waist and the bust and the shoulder and the arm length, and you measure all the things and go, no, I'm gonna need more room in the bust, or less in the waist, or I need this to be longer, this to be shorter. If you've been sewing for a while, know your body a little bit better than this random mass-produced pattern. So I tend to be a lot shorter than most patterns think I should be, so I often have to take little pinches out and shorten things up. Same with bust and waist, adjustments often do have to be made. So if you can already see by just measuring the pieces that a change is going to need to be made, yeah, absolutely go ahead and do it before making that first mock-up. Yeah. More questions. What do we have? Sometimes I make my waist too big. Do you have that happen? Yeah, I mean, sometimes I measure it, and usually if it's too big or too small, it's more because it's like in the wrong place and I have to adjust it. But yeah, sometimes things don't fit right on the first try, and you just kind of have to make your changes and either make a new mock-up or make your changes and be confident that that's good enough to go ahead and start your final project. Who decided the size standards for patterns? The makers and history. You like my earrings? Thank you. They are spiders on webs because spooky season. Should you add buttons to mock-ups? I probably wouldn't do buttons just because I don't think it's going to change the fit of the garment and let me know whether or not it's doing its job in fitting me nicely. What I would probably do if there was like a button placket or something on my pattern and I wanted to see how it looked, I would probably just overlap it the same amount that the pattern says it should overlap and then pin it in place. I probably wouldn't bother with sewing in buttons and buttonholes. Favorite fabrics I gravitate towards all the time. For mock-ups, I tend to gravitate towards whatever is going to fit the pattern nicely. I have tons of this old polyester swirly pattern fabric that I think is still sold at Joann's, even though I've had this for like forever, years and years and years and years and years. And I use that a lot because it's really nice and not stretchy, but it's also because it's polyester, at least mostly polyester. It's not something I would ever want to make an actual garment out of. So I'll sometimes use that a lot for mock-ups, and it's handy. How long have I been in this career? It's not a career. I still have a day job, so therefore, nope. How do you find historically accurate patterns or pictures for specific years? If you're looking for 1550 German dresses, how do you find examples? I mean, you say here, besides Pinterest. Pinterest is usually the first place I go to. Now, that is, of course, with the knowledge that you will need to do a little bit of your own work as well in continuing with that. You can't just look at a image, whether it's on Pinterest or any other website, that says, this is a 1550s girl, painting, portrait. You need to double check and verify who is the painter it's saying that it's supposed to be. If I go look up that painter, does it match that art style and like that information seems to be true? Can I find it on an actual museum website? Even better, if it's like a manuscript image, can I find the original manuscript and see it in its true original format? Whenever you find an image on Pinterest or what have you, it's often been altered. Either it's been selectively cropped in some way, or the colors have been changed, or it's better, if at all possible, to find the original of that thing, and that'll also tell you how reliable it is as a source of information for your 1550s German dress. But yeah, I know you said besides Pinterest, I guess Google. Like, it really is the best way to start finding specific information about a time and place, and you just kind of have to keep digging until you're finding what you actually need and want. Do I prefer hand sewing or machine sewing? 100% depends on the application. That might seem like a cop-out answer, but it's true. There are some things that, a long skirt dress side seam, yeah, I can just toss that in the machine and go. It's great. But little fiddly things like the top of a gusset that you've inserted, or goodness, sewing on bindings, finishing edges, a lot of those things seem to be so much nicer if you go ahead and hand sew them. It also is all about purpose, intent. If you want to machine sew because you need clothing for an event that you're going to tomorrow, well, sometimes that's the way it goes. Or if you are doing a competition of some sort that involves historical accuracy, then you probably want to consider hand sewing that. So it really, really depends. Yeah. Let's see. Looking through my questions. Sorry, I'm just staring here blankly at the screen. Let's see. Lots of chatting about hand sewing. What's the longest medieval camping event that I do? Yeah, I mean, I've been to Pennsic, and I think I did the 2 full weeks at least once. It was a while ago, so it's hard to remember. So Pennsic, yeah, is the longest event, being a full 2 weeks, or even if you just go for 1 week of it, that's pretty long. The vast majority of events, though, are Friday night, all of Saturday, Sunday morning, then you go home. That is almost all of them. Occasionally it'll fall on a national holiday weekend, so they'll go ahead and include all of Sunday and leave Monday morning because that's the holiday day or something like that. But yeah, usually 2 to 3 days. That's the most common for me. Let's see. Have I ever been to a British or European event? No, although that is changing, which is so exciting. Although I suppose the definition of event is also a bit different there. But yes, not yet, but soon. Oh, goodness. So many questions. Tools that are more historical or are more historically accurate. I mean, I suppose, like, I have more metal awls that are you buy in a modern like hardware store with for like leather working and things like that, but I also have a bone awl that is a little bit more documentable. For my scissors, I do not have any of the like fancy spring style uh, antique scissors. I've looked on eBay to get some, but so many of the ones that you see available for sale now are the ones that were made for sheep shearing. Like they're in the same kind of style and shape and function as some of the older scissors, but they're this big and made for shearing sheep. So I don't really want those. So I definitely have a lot of sewing tools that I use that are perfectly modern, like Ginger scissors and what have you. Let's see. I'm trying to think of like tools. Sewing, I feel, doesn't have that many tools. It's mostly needle and thread and just go. Have you tried a rotary cutter? I actually just got one like I think a week ago today. So I got a brand new rotary cutter and mat at the suggestion of the fantastic Marika of Enchanted Rose Costumes. And I have been having a lot of fun playing with that. It feels weirdly like trying to think of a way to say it. It feels less historical, less period, but at the same time, that's okay. I'm not a medieval person living, you know, 5, 6, 700 years ago. So I think it's okay to occasionally use my completely modern sewing tools and allow them the convenience that they give me to create quickly and efficiently and accurately in what little time I have available to do those sewing projects. Let's see. I have some questions about applique and embroidery on projects. I don't do a lot of it, and I definitely don't do it very much on mock-ups, although if I were to have a project that had some really extensive embroidered or applique design, then what I may do in that case is on the mock-up draw approximately where I want that design to be, where I kind of proportionately want it to fit. And that would be a good way to incorporate your mock-up with the fact that you want to do an embroidered project on it. But I definitely wouldn't do the embroidery itself on the mock-up unless I wanted to maybe do like a few practice stitches, you know? Whew. I have myself a drink and I don't think I've had any of it. And that is definitely cold now. Whoops. Also, my candle's getting low. All right. Ooh, this is a very fun question that's very SCA centric. Do you have any apprentices, seeing as I'm a Laurel? So for those of you that are not in the SCA or not familiar with its structure, we have a sort of arts tier structure system in place, and I am a Laurel, which means that I have been recognized as being kind of good at the thing I do, which is cool. What the SCA will often do is have apprentices under each Laurel, if they so choose to take one. Usually it's a way of fostering community and a help structure with people who are maybe new to the organization. And so I got asked if I have any apprentices, and I both don't and I do. I definitely don't have any in-person apprentices that I actually meet with and foster in that way, but I do have like 30,000 internet apprentices, sort of. I've always felt very awkward and weird about the concept of apprenticing because I don't consider myself to be any better or more worthy to teach other people than anyone else out there. There's plenty of people who have learned a thing far better than I've learned it, and I want to learn from them. But maybe I've learned this other thing more than them. And so they want to learn from me about that thing. And that's what is partially so cool about the internet, is that we can share each of our respective skills in these things, and we are all sort of collectively apprentices of each other, if that makes sense. So I do and I don't is the answer to that question. Let's see. Have you ever thought about making Victorian costumes? I have. That goes back to that. I'm going to a British European event in a few months, and I need to make a full 1890s outfit for it. I have nothing yet of it, so I need to make literally everything. I need to make the undergarments, I need to make corsets, and I need to make, of course, the dresses themselves, any accessories that are going to go with the outfit. I should really probably go buy some American Duchess shoes for the occasion, which I'm very excited about. Yes, absolutely. I do plan to make a Victorian outfit finally, as soon as I am done with my Harry Olsen's dress. So that is absolutely in the future. I do love that everyone's talking to each other in the chat and recommending, if someone asks a question and I'm not quite able to get to it, different people are answering really quickly with their suggestions. It's very sweet. Yes, American Duchess shoes are absolutely good for everyday life, and I wear my Stratford shoes all the time, like just to work. It's fine. Let's see. Lots of very sweet comments. I am really pretty much out of mock-up related commentary. A lot of the questions that I'm still seeing about mock-ups are ones that I've already talked about a little bit in the video so far. Yeah. Any last questions before we go? We are hitting about an hour at this point, so I think that is kind of the typical mock-up? The typical live video length, about an hour, right? Will I do more men's tutorials? Probably not, at least not anytime soon, because I am not a man, so therefore I don't get a lot of use and wear out of them. And my darling Mr. Donner, who is away at the moment, he doesn't go to very many events, so I do make him things occasionally, but no, probably not anytime soon. Oh, interesting. Has it ever happened to you that the mock-up seemed fine, but the actual piece, the garment that you made from that mock-up, was not so fine? I don't know that I've ever had that happen, but I guess I could imagine it, and for a few reasons. It could be because the fabric that you chose for your final garment was maybe not as appropriate to that project as it could have been. It could be that it's stretching in ways that are not correct, or it also could be that you accidentally have some pieces cut a little bit too much on the bias or what have you, and that's messing with your final garment and how it's fitting you. Uh, yeah, I don't know. I have not had that misfortune yet, although, knock on wood, it'll probably happen at some point. Yes, for those of you that are asking, yes, I'm going to the Prior Attire Ball in May, and that's why I need an 1890s outfit. All right, well, I think that just about does it for this conversation. So I don't know yet whether or not I'm going to leave this live up. I know that some people don't like seeing lives in their feed, so I may turn this into a unlisted video so it doesn't stay in my feed, and instead maybe make a playlist somewhere that you guys can still see my live now and maybe future lives. And that'll be a good place to view those without clogging up your subscription feed. So that is a potential idea. I personally don't often want to sit down and watch an old live, because so much of the value in a live, in my eyes, is the live interaction, the experience of being part of the live chat and getting to talk with everyone and get hopefully live feedback from the person doing the video. And that's something that you just don't get on a rewatch. However, I also really like podcasts because I like being able to listen to stuff, on my drive to and from work. So I think I might try and take the audio from this and upload it somewhere in podcast land and see if that is helpful or useful or valuable to anybody. We'll see how it goes. All right, it has been an hour and 5 minutes. Thank you guys so much for watching, and you guys have a wonderful day. Oh no, how do I stop this? Maybe you're just stuck with me here forever.